So I think we'll start. Bula Vinaka and warm greetings, everyone. All protocols observed. Hope all of you are doing well and safe. And thank you very much for joining us for the webinar on labeling and packaging Australia market, which I believe is very important for a lot of exporters and a lot of SMEs currently. And we're thankful that we've got an expert available to us that is going to assist us through the process. Australia is Fiji's second largest export market, for which export has increased in 2020 by about 8%, with total value of about 249 million worth of goods being exported. Currently, gold, ready-made garments, sweet biscuits, taro make up the export bundle. But obviously, with these webinars and seminars that we are running as part of our strategy, is to grow that bundle into new products or new products that can enter into the Australian market. So Investment Fiji is here to assist you if you need any information or inquiries onto Australian market or any other market. We are here to assist you find new markets and also at the same time assist you to understand the rules and regulation for those markets. So you can always get in touch. On the call, we also have Safida and Parikshat. Both of them are looking after the Australian market. So if you have any queries, any information you require on Australian market, you can always get in touch with us. We have launched a number of programs that you can take advantage of. One of them is we've got an online exporter guide. You can always get in touch with us and we'll be happy to guide you through that. So this exporter guide basically assists you through if you are a new exporter and don't know what to do in terms of exporting, the rules and regulations. So this is one of the programs we've launched and it's going to guide you through that process. We're also running virtual expos per market, per countries. We are coming up with one for US market. We did for Australia and New Zealand already. So if you want to be part of this expo, so promoting Fijian products overseas, you can always get in touch with us. We run a number of trade development programs, specifically on packaging, biosecurity rules and regulations, or any other relevant to exports. You continue to follow our Facebook page, and if you want any information around some of those regulations and rules, I would be happy to assist you. So you can always get in touch with us. We also have market managers for different markets. As I mentioned, we have it for Australia market. We also have it for New Zealand, US, China, Japan. So if you're keen into those markets, you always can get in touch with us and we'll be happy to assist for you to enter those markets. And for specific for today, I think it's an important topic that a lot of us are not aware of and would be happy to understand rules and regulation around it. And so it's indeed our pleasure to have an expert in this area, Miss Robyn Banks, who is joining us all the way from Darwin. Thank you very much, Robyn, for joining us. She's an expert into food labeling. She's got 20 years of experience in food labeling and regulatory management. This experience extends to working with premium international brands, and I believe she's already worked in Fiji for a bit too, with some of the brands. Robyn has also worked for National Food Authority, which looks after the food standards in Australia. And Robyn has also worked with small and medium businesses, so understands your difficulties. So today is basically, learning from her the expertise she's got into food labeling and what can we get out of it. And obviously, if you have any questions or queries, you can always email us and we'll be happy to connect. Some of the housekeeping rules during the event. If you have any specific questions, so after this, the program is quite simple. After this, we'll hand over to Robyn, who's going to take us through the presentation. But if you have any specific questions, you can always type it on the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer it at the end of this session. And we'll try to answer all your questions. And if you are not able to do so, we'll always come back to you. We've got all your email addresses, and we'll be happy to provide a feedback after this session. But we'll be happy to answer once we end this session. So without further ado, maybe hand over to Robyn, who is the expert in this area, and will take us through a presentation on this specific topic. Robyn, over to you. I think it's
unmute, yes, first. That always helps. Nothing like a silent presentation. Thank you, Kamal and the team at Investment Fiji for asking me to present today on food labelling. It's one of the things I really love talking about. So hopefully I won't just prattle on and go too far over time. So I'll get into it straight away. So what we're going to talk about today is legibility requirements, date marking of the foods, ingredient labelling, what is required for foods, warning and advisory statements and declarations, percentage labelling of foods. We're going to look at what's needed for your nutrition information on labels and getting your claims right, which is sometimes a little bit complicated in this day and age with your claims. We'll also have a touch on a little bit on net content labelling and also country of origin labelling. So the first thing we'll look at is legibility of your food labels. You have to make sure that what's on your food labels is able to be read by the consumer so they can make the right choices about the type of food they want. So the legislation requires you to make sure that the information is legible and easy to read. It's the information that's needed is prominent. It's got to be in English for Australian purposes. You can have multiple languages on the label if you like, but the information for Australian purposes must always be in English. And it's a good idea to have a background colour that allows the information to easily be seen so it stands out on the label. It doesn't get, and people don't have to peer at the label to see what the information is. So there's not much on legibility. You just have to be, consumers just have to be able to read it with what's on the label. Sorry, I'm just adjusting my screen so I can see it doesn't cover everything up. So for date marking, there are two main date marks that you can use. Use by is legislated as the date after which the food can't be consumed. So food with a use by date, if you've hit the use by date on your food product, the food product can't be sold past that date. So it's based on a health and safety issue for your food product, whether you put a use by date on it or not. The majority of foods that you will probably be providing will require a best before date. And this is based on quality. So food can be sold past the best before date in the marketplace. And it's based on the quality of the food when the food's fully marketable. So there are ways to make sure that you've got the correct date on your food product. As you probably know, there are people that will test and do accelerated shelf life testing of your product and that. So it can give you an idea of what your date mark is going to be. There are other, for baked products, bread especially, there's baked on and baked for dates, but they're only very short time frames. So I believe use by or best before are the ones that will suit the export market best. Food with a shelf life of 2 years or more doesn't need to have a date mark on it. You can put a date mark on it, and if you do, it's got to be in the format that is provided for in the Food Standards Code. So if you're putting it on, and sometimes the date mark forms part of the lot identification of the food, you must comply with the requirements of the food standards for how it's labelled. And how we do that, or to start with, there's two things. A date mark where there's not more than 3 months on the product. You don't need to include the year, so you only have the day and the month. and it must be written so it's not confusing to the consumers what is the day and what is the month in this case as well. So quite often people will still put the year on. You can do that as well, but there's examples of the types of date marks you can have there. But the key thing is make sure it's not confusing to the consumers and that it's easy for them to understand what the date is. A date mark of more than 3 months doesn't need to include the day. So you can just have the month and the year in that order. And it can be using the alphanumeric format, so the letters for the month or the numbers for the month. And you can leave off the last two. You can just use the last 2 digits of the year if you want, but make sure that it's not confusing to the consumers again. So quite often the best way to do it is to have the day, month and year, and the year in the full 4 digits of the year. So just have a look, make sure that your date marking is not confusing. Sometimes you're going to need storage instructions on your products to make sure that the product lasts for the whole time that you say the shelf life is of the product. And if there is any health and safety reason for storage instructions to be there, you must include those as well. So for example, if you've got a frozen product, you want to make sure it's completely kept frozen all the way through the logistical process of getting your product into the marketplace and into the home. So you need to put those storage instructions on that. Likewise with maybe a yogurt or something like that, it's going to have to be stored at refrigeration temperature. So you need to put those details on there too, so that the food stays safe up until the time of the expiring of the date mark or the best before date. So we then move on to looking at ingredients and ingredient labelling. So there are occasions when you don't need to include an ingredient list on your food product. And this is one particular case is if you've got the name of the food is actually the ingredient of the food. So you don't necessarily need to have an ingredient list on, for example, a container of a package of eggs. So things like that, or maybe milk, don't need to have an ingredient list where there's only a single ingredient in the package. There are some other issues where you don't need to label for ingredients. One especially is where the ingredient is a flavouring substance. You don't need to list all of the ingredients that are in the flavouring in your ingredient list. Added water is another exception for labelling. Especially added water at less than 5%, you don't need to declare that in your ingredient list. So if you're adding in water and sometimes it evaporates during the process, if it's less than 5%, then the declaration is not necessary for water in that occasion. Processing aids also don't need to be declared in your ingredient list. So if you've got a processing aid to help your process through, then, and there's no function in the final food, then you don't need to declare that processing aid. There is an exception to the exemption though, and that's when any of those foods contain allergens, for example, that need specific declaration. And we'll talk about allergens and that a little bit further on. But with your ingredient statements, the ingredients need to be listed by their common name or something that describes the true nature of the food. Or there is a section in the Food Standards Code that allows you to use generic names. So there are generic names for milk solids, there's generic names for herbs and spices. So you can use those as words to sometimes condense your ingredient list, and it makes sense sometimes to do that. there are specific declarations for some ingredients. So your allergens come into that again, so we will talk about that in a little while. And all of your ingredient lists, your ingredients must be listed in descending order by ingoing weight. So in some other markets, I think in the EU, for example, if there's less than 2% in the final food, you can put those ingredients in any order. That isn't the case for Australia. Every ingredient must be in descending order of ingoing weight. You can declare, there are some things that you can do differently with your ingredient list. If you've got dehydrated or concentrated ingredients that are reconstituted during processing, you can list them as the reconstituted ingredient. So if you've added concentrated orange juice into your product, and when it's taken back to its original form, so reconstituted back to its original form, it may give a higher looking amount, but still legitimate. You can actually declare that orange juice as rehydrated or or orange juice from concentrate or something like that. So you just need to pick your wording on that to make sure that people understand that it did come from a concentrate in the first place. And if the product's to be reconstituted prior to consumption, you can list the ingredients as the reconstituted form. So an example of that would be a dehydrated soup mix, for example, and it's mixed up with water for consumption in the home. You can actually declare all of your ingredients in the reconstituted form, and you must state that on the package when you're putting your ingredients in, that it's based on the reconstituted form. Compound ingredients going into your ingredient list, there's a couple of rules around this. Where the compound ingredient is 5% or more, it needs to be broken down into its own ingredients. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can declare it as the name of the compound ingredient and then all of the ingredients that are contained in that compound ingredient. So, for example, you might have a biscuit that's got chocolate chips in it, and there's 7% chocolate chips in your biscuits. So in your ingredient list, you can declare the chocolate chip as an ingredient and then break it down into its individual ingredients within the ingredient statement. There's another way you can do it. You can split out all the ingredients within the ingredient list. So if, for example, you have you've got a chocolate flavoured choc chip cookie. It may be that you want to split. You've got cocoa powder in the biscuit base, and you've got cocoa powder in your compound ingredient. You can split all of your ingredients out, combine your cocoa ingredients together within the ingredient list. It might work all right for you to do that and give you a more streamlined ingredient list, but it may work the other way, because we'll get into talking about percentage labelling again later on, and there are some rules around that which might err you on the side of just declaring the compound ingredient and in brackets all of those ingredients. So there's a few ways you can deal with compound ingredients when there's 5% or more. If there's less than 5% of the compound ingredient in the product, so you're a bit light on, you're only having lightly chocolate chipped cookies, so you're only putting 4% in, you need only declare the chocolate chips in that type of product, unless there's an allergen within the chocolate chips. You must declare that, or there's a food additive that has a function in the final food. You must declare those food additives in your ingredient list. So you need to work out any of those additives that are added come by way of your compound ingredient if they have a function in your final food, in determining whether they have to be put into your ingredient list or not. Talking about food additives, there's a specific way to declare food additives for Australia. You must declare the class name, so it might be a colour, it might be a flavour, it might be an emulsifier, it might be a gelling agent. You need to declare the class of the food additive, and there's a list of those within the Food Standards Code of what you can use, and they're standard to what else is used in other places as well. Now, the way you declare that then with the food additive, in brackets, you can declare the name of the food additive, or you can include the food additive number. So the numbers are pretty standard. There's a couple of minor differences where, for example, I think it's the carbonates, sodium carbonates. In other countries, they may split it out into 501, 502 in the small Roman numerals. But for Australia, that some of them are grouped together and they just have the standard food additive numbers, such as 500. And I think that's for the sodium carbonates. So you can declare it as either the name. The name might look consumer friendly to you, so you can use it that way. Or if you don't like, and it's a really long name, having the number there is perfectly okay as well. And also, there is permission. They do provide for including the E in front of the numbers, which is the European format normally. You can have the E in front of the food additive number with all of that. So there are some food additives where you must declare them all the time. The MSG group, or the monosodium glutamate group of products, whether they're added as a flavour or for some other purpose, they must be declared in the ingredient list. Also, caffeine, whether it's added for a flavour or for another purpose, must always be declared in the ingredient list as well. And then we start to move on to warning statements. So we're looking at, there's a different group. They split them up in the Food Standards Code. The warning statements are the ones that require your statements to be at a certain text height or size of type. So for normal size products, or products that have a surface area of more than 100 square centimetres, then the size of type for the warning statements must be at least 3 millimetres. For small packages where the surface area is not more than 100 square centimetres, the size of type is 1.5 millimetres. Now, there isn't all that many warning statements within the Food Standards Code. The main ones that people think about are the allergens, but they are actually advisory declarations. So they don't fall into this category of requiring 3 millimetres or 1.5 millimetres minimum size of type. One of the warning statements that we have is regarding royal jelly, and that's because it can cause fatality in some people that have asthma or are allergic to royal jelly. So that's why we have that. There's not many products that have that in it, so you don't see it around all that much. And just last year, the Food Standards, Australia-New Zealand Food Standards, brought in a warning statement for alcoholic beverages regarding pregnancy and the consumption of alcohol. Now, that's a new requirement, and when they brought it in, there were 3 years to implement. So it comes into effect. Every product that is requiring a pregnancy warning statement on it must have that label on it by July 2023. So that's covered in the standard for alcoholic beverages and also in some of the earlier earlier standards regarding what's required with food packaging and food itself. So that is coming into effect, and it's for alcoholic beverages with more than 1.15% alcohol volume. So just make sure if you're planning to export alcoholic beverages to Australia, that you follow through on the warning statement as well. There's, for the size of the bottle or the size of the package, the size of the type, and what's required with the logo and the statement varies. So there's different size of types for different package size, so maximum dimension of the package. With our advisory statements, now these don't require a specific size of type, but they need to be, and the wording's not mandated, but it needs to reflect the intention of the standard. Some of the ones that we have are the so-called sugar replacers, and they can have a laxative effect if there's an excess consumption of the product. And mostly you find it in confectionery products, the sugar-free confectionery products, but there are some other products out there that add lactitol or maltitol or sorbitol or polydextrose to their products. And if you've got more than 10% or more than 25% in the product, or you've got a combination of them, you need to have this statement that there's an excessive consumption may cause a laxative effect, so that people know not to have too many of those, because it may not be a pleasant effect for them. So there are other advisory statements that you need to be aware of as well. One is bee pollen, and some of the beverages from cereals and nuts and seeds, or indeed milk and soy milk beverages where there's a specific fat or below a specific fat content or protein content, then there must be a statement that it's not a suitable complete milk replacement for children, and it's varying ages. It's either 2 years, 5 years, depending on the protein content or the fat content. So you need to be aware of that if you're providing products along those lines. If you've got aspartame or aspartame acesulfame in the salt in the food, you need a statement to state that the product contains phenylalanine, and that's due to there are some people that can't process phenylalanine at all, so they need to stay away from those types of from those products that have those ingredients in them. Guarana or extracts of guarana must have a statement that it contains caffeine, and where quinine's added, that the food contains quinine. The one that's changed recently, only this year, in late February this year, is the plain English allergen labelling has come into the Food Standards Code, and it's been brought in. There's no change essentially to what happens with allergens. What they've done is they've now specified how you put it on your label. That is the change that's occurred here. So they've defined required names for when you're labelling your allergens. Previously, they left it up to the individual company to determine what they had to do, and they brought in it was a blanket tree nuts requirement. What they've done now is they've listed the individual nuts that are of concern. Coconut is not one of them. It's never been an allergen of concern for Australia. So what they've done, they've given us required names we must use. They've stated how it must be declared within the ingredient list. And it says that it's brought in a size of type, but it's brought that in to state that the allergens that you put into into your product, when you're labeling them in your ingredient list, the size of type of the allergen must be at least the same size of type as the other ingredients. So essentially, yeah, don't change the size of type. You can make it larger if you like, but don't make it smaller. You must also declare your allergen in bold font so that it stands out for the consumer. And if you've got several ingredients that have the same allergen within your ingredient list, then you must declare the allergen for each of those ingredients. So for example, if you've got cream and you've got cheese in your ingredient list, you must declare that it comes from milk for each of those ingredients. If you have, for example, wheat flour, you can highlight the wheat in bold font in the name of the ingredient. But if you have an ingredient like buttermilk, where buttermilk is one word, you must actually declare the milk in the format that's required in brackets after the buttermilk. So yeah, they're just setting up a regime so that everybody does things the same way, so that consumers become used to the way things are declared, so they don't pick up and consume foods that are going to make them ill or cause really severe reactions and sometimes life-threatening ones. So yeah, so it must be next to your allergen declaration, must be next to the ingredient name unless it's identical to the ingredient name itself. The other new thing that's come in is for processing aids. Normally we don't declare processing aids. What people have done in the past is if there is a processing aid, say for example, a flavouring is on a wheat-based maltodextrin, they may have declared contains wheat underneath the ingredient list to cover off what's in the processing aid, in the flavouring itself. But in this case now, you must declare, if there's an allergen in your processing aid, you must declare that there's a processing aid in your ingredient list and that what the allergen is. So for a flavour, for example, you might list your flavouring as maybe your final ingredient in your food product. You would then state processing aid afterwards and in brackets wheat. Or you can say processing aid containing wheat, and it must be in your ingredient list from now on, once you start using this format of allergen labelling. There is also a requirement to have a summary statement in close proximity to the ingredient list, read in the same direction and in the same size of type as the ingredients in your ingredient list. So what it must do, it must have contains as the first word, and then list all of your allergens that are in your product. So it's to give people an easy stop to say, oh yeah, it's got all of those in it, and then they can go to the ingredient list and find out what foods they are that have those allergens in, and so they can make the decision themselves. There are some exceptions to requiring allergens to be labelled, and these haven't changed. They're the same as what were there previously. Wheat with glucose syrup that's derived from wheat starch, where all of the gluten possible has been removed, and there's not more than 20 milligram per kilo of gluten in the product or in the glucose syrup, you don't need to declare that the glucose syrup is from wheat. For fish, I think it's isinglass from fish swim bladders, which is used in wine. For clarification, you don't need to declare that. For soy oil, which has been degummed, neutralised and had all of the protein matter removed from it, you don't need to declare soy for soy oil if that's the case. For barley, oats and rye, and also for wheat, if it's used in beer or spirits, you don't need to declare the wheat, the barley, oats or rye in those situations. So make sure if you're doing those sorts of products, just check that you've got those covered off okay from declaration for allergens point of view. Now, how do we declare those allergens? Well, they've given us a whole list of what to do and how to do it. So in the first column, we have what you need to declare in the ingredient lists. In the second column, it's the required names for other declarations, including summary statements. So you've got your lists there. Of note, barley, oats and rye, you declare them as a cereal in your ingredient list, but in your summary statement, your contain statement, you declare it as gluten. Okay, so for wheat, it's a little bit different because some people are allergic to wheat as a cereal. They may not necessarily have a problem with gluten. So for wheat, they're requiring you to declare wheat in the ingredient list and gluten in your summary statement along with the declaration for wheat. Okay, so people can work out what is necessary for them in that case. The nuts, we've got almonds, Brazil nuts, cashews, hazelnut, macadamia, pecan, pine nut, and pistachio and walnut. So they are the nuts that have been listed. And previously, the fact that they included tree nuts would have brought in some other nuts that weren't of concern for the Australian consumer. So they've now specified the types of nuts, so that has made it a little bit clearer for manufacturers in what needs to be declared. And they've also, we've got crustacea, egg, fish, lupin, milk, and they've brought in mollusk as well. So that's a different form of declaration for allergens. They were always in the list, but the way of declaring mollusks, they've separated that out. And peanuts, sesame seeds, soy and soybean are also there. I've got an example of how to declare these in your ingredient list. So it's a cheesy salad dressing. So we've got milk in the cheese, we've got whole egg there, we've got sulfites present in a preservative, and we've added, there's Worcestershire sauce in there as well. So it's got a whole heap of wheat, barley and fish. And then we've also got wheat flour, we've got soy in the vegetable gum, there's milk in the flavour, and that would be there as it's probably maybe lactose as a carrier for the flavour. And we have also a processing aid somewhere that's got soy in it. So how do we label the contain statement? It's underneath, they're in bold font as well, same size type as the ingredients, and we list all of them there again. We only need to list the wheat as a cereal, and we need to declare gluten for the wheat, the barley, the wheat and the barley in there, and soy as well, and fish. So that gives you an idea of how to declare those ingredients in the allergens in your ingredient list and the summary statement. I haven't covered the may contain side of things here because that's voluntary and is based on best practices and HACCP analysis of what your process is like. So if there's a potential to include, if there's an issue of you can't necessarily get rid of any other cross-contamination from other allergens, you need to have a look at what you might do with a may contain statement. So just make sure that you've got your processes right and you get rid of any potential cross-contamination there. I might point out that about half of the recalls of food products in Australia are due to allergen labelling. So it pays to work on make sure your allergen labelling is correct through your whole process, to make sure that your label is correct so that your product doesn't end up with a product recall. And there are, it's probably about, I think there's about between 200 and 300 recalls every year in Australia, and about half of them are for allergen labelling, incorrect allergen labelling. Another example here that we have is, it's like a muesli bar. This is a multi-pack, and there's 5 individual bars in there. So again, you've got it's got oats in it, so you declare your gluten in your summary statement. You've got wheat, so that gets included in your summary statement, as well as the milk and soy. Now, what does change here, because it's an individual bar wrapped bar inside another box, on those individual bar labels, you must actually put the summary statement on your product. So if you've got a package that's individually wrapped inside a multi-pack, allergen labelling goes on the inner pack as well, unless the surface area or total surface area of the label or the product is less than 30 square centimetres. Okay. And we'll move on to percentage labelling, which we touched on in the ingredient list. Essentially, if it's a characterising ingredient or component, or it's mentioned in the name, you have pictures or other words of specific ingredients in your products, you must label it for percentage labelling. There is an issue if the variation doesn't govern the choice of the consumer. So you declare it as a percentage. Obviously, it can be declared in your ingredient list. If it's 5% or more, you can round to the nearest whole number. Below 5%, you round to the nearest 0.5%. You can declare it in brackets in your ingredient list, or you can list as a separate statement in on your label underneath your ingredient list. An example of characterising components would be cocoa solids in chocolate. So people when they think of chocolate, they think of the amount of cocoa solids in it. So declare your percentage cocoa solids there. And potentially for milk chocolate, you can declare the milk solids as well. That potentially is also something that consumers will buy a product based on. Here's an example here. We call our biscuit the chock-a-block full of dark chocolate bits. So we declare the dark chocolate percentage there. I've also put in the allergen labelling there for you as well, with that to give you an idea. So it's based on if there's any moisture removed from the product during processing, the final amount would be based on that moisture removal as well. So you can work that out that way. So we then move on to nutrition information panels. These need to include the number of servings in the package, the average quantity of the serving size, the average energy content, protein content, fat, saturated fat, carbohydrate, that's available carbohydrate for Australia, sugars, and sodium. These are the standard ones that you'll have on your nutrition information panel. If you have claims on your product, you then need to add to the information in your nutrition information panel. The available carbohydrate is different. If you're doing products for the US, for example, their carbohydrate amount is different to the Australian amount. For Australia, we remove any unavailable carbohydrate or dietary fibre from the total carbohydrate amount. So for Australia, you can work out the available carbohydrate by subtracting from 100 your protein, your fat, your ash, your alcohol, your dietary fibre, and any other unavailable carbohydrate. I think I've got a lot of them there. So you can do it by difference, or you can analyse it as well, or you can work out what it is that you've added in yourself. Excuse me. Oh, and if you've made a claim, you must include those other nutrients that are subject to the claim in the nutrition information panel. And we'll touch on claims in a little while. That's the standard panel that we have. And this is a format that must be used. If you're exporting to the US, they have a different format, and that's not permitted in Australia. This is a standard that we must use. You can add in your other nutrients underneath the entry for sodium. If you've made a claim, for example, about maybe your trans fat or saturated fat amount in your product, you will need to add in, you will need to declare also monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, and trans fats. You can put those entries in underneath the saturated fat area and group all the fats together. That's permitted. And there are, in Schedule 12 of the Food Standards Code, it lists, I think it's Schedule 12, it lists the types of nutrition information panel for different sorts of entries with the fats and that sort of thing. So you can have a look at that and just work out which one it is. But mostly other claims, you might claim vitamin C on your orange juice. Well, the vitamin C level would go in underneath the sodium amount there. There are energy factors for calculation of your energy amounts for Australia. These vary again as well in some instances. Fat is 37 kilojoules, available carbohydrate is 17 kilojoules, protein is 17 kilojoules, unavailable carbohydrate, including dietary fibre, is 8 kilojoules per gram for its energy factor. So if you look at a US label, for the same product, their carbohydrate, their energy amount will be higher because they'd be using something like the 17 kilojoules to calculate their energy amount. So for Australia, you use 8 kilojoules to calculate, for the dietary fibre, to calculate your energy. Alcohol has 29 kilojoules per gram, and the sugar replacers, so your sorbitols, your polydextrose, your isomalt, they all have different energy factors. So if you're using those in your products, make sure that you have a look at what the energy factors are for those. There are exemptions for your including a nutrition panel. Alcoholic beverages are one of those. Herb spices, herbal infusions, tea and coffee, you don't need to put nutrition information panels on those. Vinegar, salt, kava doesn't need one either. If you're selling food additives and processing aids or single ingredient foods like those ones there, gelatin, water and ice makes sense. Jam setting compounds and other beverages, you don't need to put the nutrition information panel on those. But you may need to provide the information to the people that import from you in order for them to provide information to consumers when they ask. So you need to have it prepared. You don't necessarily need to have it on your label. And food in small packages. A small package is not more than 100 square centimetres of total surface area of the package. It isn't the label amount, it's the total package. So how do you work it out? You can get it analysed in a laboratory if you like. There's a nutritional panel calculator on the Food Standards website. That's their website there, and they actually have a calculator there. You can go in and use that. They have quite a number of food ingredients listed in that calculator area. You put in your own recipe and your own amounts, and it will calculate through. It will only give you the standard nutrition information panel. If you have other claims that you want to make, you'll have to get that analysed yourself to make sure that your claims are correct. But they will give you the standard information from that. You can also get information from your suppliers. So use your suppliers quite heavily to get the information from them. And there are other food composition tables and databases out there. Now, with your claims, if you're making claims, there's nutrition content claims, which are the absence or presence of a nutrient. Health claims, they talk about having a health effect, a food property or a food having a health effect. It also, in some instances, you might need to do a nutrient profiling scoring criterion and assess whether your food fits into that particular requirement to make the claim. That's particularly so for health claims, and that relates to the nutrient profiling score, which is gives you baseline points, fruit and vegetable points, and protein points and fibre points. So the baseline points are dependent on the sort of the bad nutrients, your saturated fat. It talks about protein. It bumps up the score for high sodium, high saturated fat, and high energy content. You can take in your protein amounts and your fruit and vegetable amounts there as well, and your dietary fibre points to minimise the effect of those negative sort of nutrients. Claims are not permitted for kava, infant formula, or foods that have more than 1.15% of alcohol in them. These are just some of the claims that are permitted. They're listed specifically in Schedule 4 of the Food Standards Code, and they give you the limits that you can have or what's required, the conditions required in order to make claims. So there's quite a few there, and it relates a lot to your main nutrients, fat, saturated fat, sugars, etc. Gluten is also there. You can talk about increased amounts with your dietary fibre. They have good source and excellent source there, and you need to have reference foods for some of these. A reference food is something that can replace, your food can replace the reference food, so it's similar to, or it might be something that you make yourself. You might have a chip product, for example, and then you make a reduced sodium chip to make it better. Well, you can compare it to your original product that way. So you need to work out, if you're making comparative claims, what your reference food is. Stay away from anything therapeutic. The TGA, or Therapeutic Goods Administration here in Australia, rules over anything therapeutic. So therapeutic claims are not permitted. You can't compare vitamin or mineral claims at all. And if you're using the term diet, there is a specific conditions for claiming diet foods. You can't claim that there's a slimming effect. And make sure that you've got enough of the claim nutrient and what you say complies. And if you're going for something, say a vitamin or mineral claim, make sure, especially get them tested and make sure that you've got the right amount on your nutrition information panel. We can find information about nutrient claims or health claims. These are listed in the standard 1.2.7. There's a standard for vitamins and minerals. Schedule 4 lists all the types of claims that you can make. Schedule 1 lists the recommended dietary intakes and estimated safe and adequate daily dietary intakes for your vitamins and minerals. There's, in the mandatory advisory statement, Schedule 9, there's phytosterols is listed in there, and there's specific requirements around the addition of phytosterols, and there's usually claims about those. So there's specific advisory statements for them. And Schedule 5 talks about the nutrient profiling method. Schedule 6, if you've got a health claim that you think it's not listed, but you've got all the evidence that says that it fits and you can make this sort of claim, you have the scientific evidence, you've got papers to back it up, there's a systematic review you can go through to put it into FSANZ to have it assessed to get your claim into the as an approved one. So that covers off claims. So there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of information on the Food Standards website as well around how to deal with claims. So if you're thinking about that, have a look there. Net content is something that's a little bit different for Australia as well. It must include the name and address in Australia, so your importer particularly maybe is who you might use for that. This is also a requirement of the food standards for labelling. It must be clear and conspicuous, and it must be on the main display panel. And if you've got more than one main display panel, it must be at least on one other main display panel. There's limitations of where you can put the net content statement. It must be 2 millimetres, at least 2 millimetres from the edge of the package, and there must be a 2 millimetre clear space around the net weight statement. So there mustn't be any other words or graphic matter or pictures surrounding within 2 millimetres of the net weight statement. For a cylindrical product, so for a can or a jar, there's a 120-degree arc that you must place your net content statement on. So that's there to give you an idea of where that's required. And there's also size of type, but it's dependent on the maximum dimension of your package. So they're there, if your package dimension is within those, the minimum character size is on the right. It can, of course, be larger, but it mustn't be smaller than those maximum dimensions. So that's say, for example, the size of the bottle, not the size of the label you need to look at for that. The other thing that's a little bit different for Australia is the country of origin. So they've just recently, about 3 years ago, brought in different country of origin statements where consumers were particularly interested in how much Australian content was in the product. So they've defined grown or produced, and for foods where all significant ingredients are grown or produced in a particular country, and nearly all of the processing occurs there, you can claim grown or produced in a particular country. In the main part of it, made in will be the declaration of choice for food products. And this is defined as where the food undergoes its last substantial transformation. So, yeah, if you're producing food in Fiji, or if you're processing food in Fiji into a final product, made in Fiji will be the required statement. But if you have Australian content, you can actually put that on your label in the required format. If you're just putting the made in Fiji statement, there must be a clearly defined box around it, around the statement, and there should be at least a 3 millimetre clear space around it as well. And they recommend don't put it on the base of the package, but have it out in the main part of your labelling, package labelling. If you want to put the Australian format for Australian content, you can do that, and you can say that, for example, it's like this form of made in Fiji from at least 70% Australian ingredients, and you can get that. You can get those. You can. There's a tool on the. It's through the ACCC website, and you can actually download your country of origin statements like that there. Yeah, and There are priority foods. There are actually non-priority foods. So the ones that don't need, you can just have a statement made in Fiji without the clearly defined box for herbs and for seasonings, for biscuits and snack foods, but that doesn't include cakes, for soft drinks and sports drinks, for confectionery, for water, for tea and coffee, and alcoholic beverages is the other one. So you can just have made in Fiji, but there's nothing to stop you using the other format as well. Yeah, so if you've got any of those products, just be wary of the biscuits and snack food ones, because cakes are not part of that. With the confectionery product, jams are not part of that at all. They require the clearly defined box around the origin statement. That's a quick visit through Australian food labelling, but if you want to learn more, you can go to my website and have a look there. My email address is there for you. And also in my website, I have online training courses and the Essentials Food Labelling course, which gives you the basic for your information. There's a code there to use to get $100 off the course for all the attendees here today. So thank you for listening, and thank you for letting me share about Australian food labelling.
Thank you, Robyn, for the information, and I'm sure our exporters attending have learned a lot. And for all of you, we'll be sharing the presentation. And if you have any questions, you can always come back to us, and we'll try to connect you to Robyn. And already she's provided you the email if you want to do it directly. But there are a few questions, Robyn. Maybe we could go through a few of them. I think Edward has been asking a few questions. So the first question he's got is just wanted to confirm that the nutrition information panel for the USA isn't allowed for Australian market. He just wanted to confirm that that's his first question.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You need to have the Australian format. It actually has different things on the US product, US table anyway. And one thing I actually should mention, products coming into Australia, they have to go through, they'll go through quarantine. And there's the imported food inspection program, and labelling will be looked at. And if there are some things that aren't correct, the food will not necessarily get through. So yeah, you need to have the Australian Nutrition Panel on.
Okay. Thanks, Robyn. The other question he's got is, says Kava is exempted from to have the nutritional information panel.
Yes.
For all packet size, or does it matter based on packet size?
No, that's for all packet sizes. Yep. Okay. You may need to provide it though, because some people might ask for it. So you need to have the information available. In Australia, if somebody wants to ask, say, at the point of sale, they want to ask about it, they're supposed to be able to give them the information. So it might be that you provide it to your importers and that, so that they have the information available. But you don't need it on the label as such for Kava.
The other question he has got is, food labelling expects provide services to review packaging to make sure they're compliant for Australian market. And if so, what is the cost like? So,
okay. Okay. Yes, I can. Yes, we can. But the cost generally depends on the type of product and how complicated it is, and if you're putting other claims in that. Generally, a standard product, and provided all the information is there as well, the majority of the information is there. Generally, where it's sort of a fairly clean sort of label with the information available in that, it's usually $250, or for Fiji, is what it would be for a standard thing, because I don't have to add GST to that. Yeah. So it's around about that, but we need to have a chat about what the product is and yes, sort of what you want to say about your product and that. Yeah.
We have a few other questions. Gary is asking, where can we find a little more definition of available carbohydrates, please?
Okay. Well, I can actually put that in an email and send through to Safida for forwarding on, if you like. I can do that, because it's essentially a copy and a paste, and I'll give you the reference details for which standard, where it is, in case you, and a link to the standard as well, if you like.
Okay. So for Gary and everyone, once we've got all your email addresses, we'll share that information across. So if you have any question, you can always come back to us and we'll do the linking. Also, there's another question, Robyn, it's from Claire. She says, can the allergen advisory statement be stated before the ingredient list, or it is mandatory to be stated after the ingredient list?
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. It's to be in close proximity. Let me have a look and come back to you on that as well. Generally, I guess we've gotten used to it in Australia that it's followed the ingredient list, because people did that as a voluntary issue. Let me give you the exact wording of it, and I'll come back in an email to you on that as well.
Thanks. So I think yeah, that's kind of the last question. So to everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure a lot of people are happy that Fiji just won. So
very good. Congratulations, everyone.
And thank you, Robyn, for joining us. Thank you for your time. Obviously, we'll be in touch, and we can always discuss other topics that are relevant to our exporters. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Please stay in touch, stay safe. And if you have any queries, you can always email us at info@investmentfiji.org.fj. Or when we email you back with the presentation, you can also email us back. So thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you, Robyn.